Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. There's been so much hype lately around emerging technologies, especially blockchain. And on one hand, people are saying that there's this adoption problem that we need to try and solve to get more businesses into the industry. And on the other, we've got people outside of that industry that are struggling to understand blockchain and the transformational qualities that it could bring to their business and just begin to comprehend how it would work in their world. Now, on this podcast, I try to make sense of it all and get everybody on the same page and learn how businesses can solve real problems by leveraging emerging technologies rather than fearing it or avoiding it. So when I recently discovered a company called IdRamp, I had to get them on the show because they specialise in self-sovereign identity, which you may have seen referred to as blockchain identity online. And they're uniquely focused on transforming identity and access management, all for the enterprise. So if you're in the mood to learn more about the increasing demand for decentralized identity management infrastructure and so much more, you're in for a treat today. So I invite you to let me take your ears on a trip to Iowa in the US so we can speak with the CEO of IdRamp. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Mike. Can you tell the listeners a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thanks. Thanks for having me. Mike Vesey. I'm the CEO of IdRamp. And IdRamp is a decentralized identity fabric that allows really single point federation for service delivery. So what makes it unique is that we have policy controls for federated services where, I control my users, you control yours. We all meet together in the service at the end. And we recently extended this fabric with the incorporation of Sovereign Foundations Network. It gives us the ability to issue credentials, digital credentials, for service access to a global audience. So that truly eliminates passwords and provides credential-based access to any SSO-capable service on the internet. So it's an exciting space.
And self-sovereign identity is sometimes referred to as blockchain identity, but to people that are unfamiliar with terms like that, can I ask that you offer a bit of an overview of exactly what it is and help everyone listening understand how it could work in their world?
That is a fantastic question, and it's probably the most important thing that we deal with when we're out promoting these services. Everyone knows the word blockchain. Everybody has a certain feeling and belief when they hear the word. And so, let me try to unpack that a little bit and see if we can clarify. So let's go through a scenario. Suppose I wanted to verify your home address. I could just ask, and because you're a stand-up guy, I'd probably believe you. But what if I wanted to make absolutely certain? You could pull out your driver's license and show that to me. That certainly contains your address. But what if you also pulled out your passport and your voter identification card, and I was able to match all three of those addresses? I'd be pretty sure that if I sent you a letter, you're going to receive it. Interestingly, all the government credential issuers I just mentioned here are either issuing today or planning to issue digital credentials very soon. When you go to renew your driver's license, you're still going to get the physical ID, but you'll also be given a digital representation of that ID that you can hold in a personal wallet. So this wallet can be an app on your smartphone or a website or whatever, but the important thing is that you alone have access to the information and the ability to grant access to it. Since it's issued to you and held under your control, if someone wants to verify it, they need your consent and involvement in the process. So notice I haven't mentioned anything about any of this information ever being stored on the blockchain, and it's not. And here's where blockchain comes in. So if we go back to our scenario, you now have a digital identity wallet, and it contains those three credentials: your driver's license, your voter ID card, and your passport. So I'm going to ask you digitally to prove your address. So some application that I've built is going to ask your digital wallet for your home address from your passport and your driver's license and your voter ID card. Your personal wallet is going to notify you that Mike's app would like to receive your home address from all three of those sources, from your passport, from your driver's license, and your voter ID registration card. You choose whether or not to accept or send that. If you send it, then then I'll receive it, and I can do that matching and on my side. So this is great, a lot less friction, and I should be really positive that I have your address now, right? Well, the problem is, just because you tell me digitally still doesn't mean that I can trust it. So back to the issuance, when you're issued your driver's license, it's digitally signed with a cryptographic signature, and that cryptographic signature, think of that as like a certificate of authenticity, right? So the issuing governing body for your driver's license, the Department of Motor Vehicles here in the States, will issue that digital credential and sign it and give it that authenticity signature, and then they write that signature to the blockchain. So none of the information goes to the blockchain. Your home address never lives on the blockchain, but the certificate of authenticity that says this credential was issued by us and is still valid, has not been revoked, and has not been tampered with. That's the information that gets written to the blockchain. So now my application can ask for this information, you confirm and send it back, and then I can turn around and ask the blockchain to verify the authenticity of the credentials that I received those values from. And if everything checks out there, I'm pretty sure I've got your home address. So this is the role that blockchain plays in identity. Your identity is yours, under your control alone, but the blockchain provides a globally accessible network to hold credentials and validate their authenticity. In the case of identity, and the way that we're implementing identity and credential-based issuance, blockchain is really nothing more than the network. Blockchain is really good at detecting changes, and it's really good at being easy to adopt globally. So, as I mentioned in my opening there, Sovereign, has built this network, basically a global network full of stewards, and they all manage this network with a governance layer to control it. So when I say I'm going to identify you using blockchain technology, all I'm really doing is just matching, cryptography. I'm not taking any personal information, putting it on the blockchain. There's never anything like that's personally identifiable that gets stored on the blockchain. It basically is just that audit record saying, I'm issuing you something and I'm going to certify that you should have it. And it allows the rest of the world to validate that that was an actual true statement. It doesn't allow them to mine that data or get that data from the blockchain in any way. So it's very important to dispel that myth. I'm glad you asked that question. We get it a lot.
Excellent. And of course, whenever anyone thinks about blockchain, a lot of people think about solutions that are built on future promises or even solving problems that don't even exist yet. So for me, this is where it gets exciting, because at IdRamp, you're uniquely focused on transforming identity and access management for the enterprise. So can you tell me a little bit more about the problems that you're actually helping businesses solve?
Certainly, yeah, and IdRamp is exactly in that space, and we always have been in that space. Before we entered into decentralized identity from a credential perspective, we were in the decentralized identity in just the old school federation type scenario. So our focus is always with velocity, making sure that an enterprise can act and react to changes in the identity stack or other dynamics. We've yet to meet an enterprise of any size that doesn't have very complex identity challenges. And that is more than just, hey, we've got an Active Directory full of 1,000 users. There's always multiple sources. There's business partners. There are external contractors, all these things that throw a lot of gray area into the identity space. And, we like to boil it down and have everything black and white. And that's certainly what we buy from our vendors when we go out and buy our identity access management solutions. And then there's all this other stuff that always gets in the way. So IdRamp has always looked at handling the gray, right? So we've never been an identity provider. We don't say we are creating an identity for you or your users. We say bring what you have, and we will help you, see the light in the fog.
So can I ask that you possibly walk me through the blockchain identity space and ultimately what makes IdRamp unique from all those other solutions out there? Because there's just it's such a crowded space, isn't it? And everyone's looking for those different solutions. From what I've seen from what you guys are doing, it is incredibly unique.
It is. What the hardest thing about doing it the way that we're doing it is trying to stay true to the standards that are being formed. This is very dynamic, as you can imagine. There's a lot of this stuff is still growing and breathing, but the folks at IBM and the Hyperledger project put together this project called Indy. Great documentation around it. A lot of people plugged in, working toward the common goals. And so we work very hard in not only forging new solutions and breaking new ground in the industry, but also staying true to those standards, because it is, as I mentioned earlier, it's that governance and that oversight and the rules that are going to ultimately make this technology consumable for the masses. There are a lot of other providers, most of them just earlier adopters than IdRamp that have closed ecosystems. They're private ledgers that they permission and maintain themselves. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that. It's just hard to build a globally transformative service when you have to carry proprietary technology. So we're huge believers, and we are stewards on Sovereign's network I mentioned before. So we have the ability to promote others to interact with and communicate on that trusted network. And so we really believe that we all grow together much more effectively than any of us individually. And that does cost us, some velocity at times, right? Sometimes it's easier to just say, well, we need to go this way because it's going to get us where we want to go. But we spend a lot of time trying to stay true to the standards. And I think that's the biggest differentiator that IdRamp has. We also have some pretty unique vision on the way the industry can use these services and this technology, right? There's a lot of, I call them forklift solutions out there, right? Where you come in and say, we want to do this. And as long as you use all their stuff and you're drinking the Kool-Aid, then everything's great. But our world and working with our enterprise customers is not great, right? It's always full of, like I said, the gray area. And so we believe that it's our responsibility, if we're going to suggest that an organization use this new technology, we have a responsibility to build a bridge from where they are today to where they're going.
And for business leaders listening outside of the blockchain space and are tuning in today, just trying to obtain a bit more of a better understanding of the technology, how is blockchain technology helping you to transform identity and access management for enterprises that were previously not possible before blockchain?
Yeah, so that goes back to the credential issuance and management. So IdRamp has some solutions, and there's others that are coming on the market as well, that are going to allow those business leaders to fully embrace credential management as a means of access control and entitlement. So what that means is today, the world's full of funnels, and the identity management system is a huge funnel. If you think about how we interact and how we connect to external services, those services always home run back to the identity management system via single sign-on. And they go through some policy control, and they expose the would-be bad guy to a lot of information, right? There's a lot of knowledge in knowing, I'm going to go right through this system, and this system contains all the information that I want to access. And so it's a very, it not only is limited, peaks and valleys, onboarding time, it has to be scaled. It's a very expensive service to maintain. It also contains a lot of really sensitive information we don't want to make available. So the promise of this technology and using credentials is we take our users and we run them through those policies the first time, and we determine based on the rules and policies and things in place what services you need to access, what level of entitlement you need, and we issue credentials based on that information. Then those credentials are what are carried to the service providers to interact with those services. We don't have a dependency on that identity management system real time to be in the loop. So it protects the service from being on the fully visible to bad guys. And it also expedites the flow of user authentication and access control. And because, of course, these credentials are revocable, they can still maintain the enterprise or the business using the credentials still maintains that control to revoke that credential at any time, which is going to immediately then restrict access. So it really can transform the entire way that identity access control and management is achieved today.
And for following this space from the outside as well, there does seem to be a real thirst and increasing demand for decentralized identity management infrastructure. But I'm curious, can you expand on why you think that is such a real game changer?
Sure. User friction comes to mind. So we're always looking for a way to improve user friction and reduce the amount of friction that users have to go through. And if you look at the concessions that we're making right now in the interest of security, we're adding in things like multi-factor, two-factor, all these other things that are, they're moving the needle from a security perspective, but boy, are they really heavy on the end user. And so we're not doing our end users any favors by implementing all of this new generation, next generation technology. If you look at what decentralization can do, and specifically, some of the things I was talking about with credentials are being able to verify things that maybe you didn't issue, right? Which is the real big value and promise in digital credentials is that I can validate something about you that I didn't issue, like a state, or a government issued credential, something of that nature. And that's a huge game changer because now we're doing all of those multi-factor checks and validation proofs in the background. We're not doing them by asking you directly. We're just asking a digital wallet or some other device that has the ability to communicate with a proofing agent, and all that stuff comes through behind the scenes. So we're taking all of the friction out from the user. Also, as we mentioned before, removing the passwords we're not shielding the passwords or somehow storing or masking or submitting the password for the user. There just is no password, right? So I think that's really the big benefit for the technology moving forward.
So I'm curious, what kind of companies will benefit most from IdRamp services, do you think? And do you have any use cases that you could possibly share with me?
Yeah, I've got a really good use case, and the first part of that question is really interesting because every time we go out to talk to an organization about how IdRamp and our decentralized identity solutions can help their business from an identity perspective, we always end up in some really interesting conversations because everyone has their own use and their own set of use cases for the technology because it is so broad. And so we end up with some very interesting conversations. But let me give you a great use case that will kind of drive home the value of what we're doing. So an organization has a webcasting system, right? And so this is a system where they have quarterly global webcasts. And it's a very large organization. These things can go from 30 to 40,000 people that join these webcasts and watch these live streams. So if you think about the way we used to do this, centralized repository, centralized identity management system, all of those systems would have to be scaled. Because everybody's got calendar entries, right? When it's time to join, everybody is receiving a notification at the time of the event, and everybody's clicking on that link all at once. And so you have 40, 50,000 users descending on your identity management system at once. So it created a huge spike. All those systems would have to be scaled up. The systems handling the webcast would have to be scaled up. And it was a very, very onerous process to get users into this event. By issuing those as a digital credential upon registration, now all the user has to do to get into that webcast is provide that credential from their mobile device or wherever they have that stored. and they don't have to do that home run back through the identity management system. So now you've just turned your access control network, instead of your wherever you have your identity management system hosted, you've turned that into a global network now of agents around the world that can prove that credential is valid and hasn't been revoked and get into that webcast. So it completely flatlined the identity management system's load during the onboarding process, and the users, had a reduced friction experience. All they had to do was scan a QR on the screen with their mobile phone, and they were permitted access to that webcast.
And I'm also intrigued, how did you actually get into decentralized identity, and what's the story behind IdRamp? Because I've got a feeling there's got to be a bit of a story there.
Yeah, there is. It's actually a great story. We, in a former life, in the early 2000s, we were a Microsoft partner and contractor working on their live meeting product, which was the predecessor to WebEx and Zoom and some of the other meeting conference providers. And we went around, we worked with a lot of their enterprise customers on the deployment, because this was very early days, single sign-on. In fact, it was, pretty much non-existent. And so we built this little solution that would take users from their Active Directory system or whatever internal directory system they were using. And we had some APIs that would call out to the live meeting service, make sure there was a user account created, make sure they could log in, and then we just redirect the user. And this was, it was such a simple thing, but it was completely transformative. It turned, organizations that just couldn't fathom how they were going to get their users onboarded, right? You're looking at sending 10, 20,000 users in an Excel spreadsheet. So there really wasn't a good solution to do that at the time. We developed that solution, and from that day, so literally for that long, we've been working with the enterprise trying to streamline and make their identity management systems more receptive to a lot of the change and inconsistencies in the industry. So, and IdRamp was really born out of that. That policy control. I think in the opening, I mentioned federation is usually a pretty messy thing. You've got a lot of data moving back and forth, and IdRamp tries to take a lot of that out and just say, connect, you manage your users, I'll manage mine. And then we collectively decide what services they need to use. So it's a very interesting story.
Excellent. And of course, it wouldn't be a blockchain podcast without asking you to look into a crystal ball and look into the future. So I've got to ask, what do you think the next 5 years will look like for digital identity, and indeed IdRamp and the role that they'll play in that future?
Sure. I think you're going to see more organizations developing and promoting decentralized solutions. And the really exciting thing for us is that everyone is on the same page with interoperability and routability. So, we spend a good deal of time in the community on the technical side, obviously, and the conversations that are going on between players like Microsoft and IBM that are forming ways not only to do credential-based, decentralized identity solutions, but also to make them interoperable is why I get so excited about it. Because I think, we can't build silos and expect to change the world. But when everybody's doing the same thing and to the same goal, it really lends itself well to to having some real change in the industry. So IdRamp I see as leading that charge. We have built some products and tools that are going to help people transition to a credential-based system. For example, we have a product out now that will allow a service provider to just connect up via whatever standard SSO protocol they want to select, and we will handle their identity. Integrations to social as well as a self-sovereign. And what that does is it really then just prevents that service provider from ever having to do a password creation process at all. Right now, some may say, well, you can log in with Facebook or you can log in with Twitter. But there's always a certain percentage of their users that they can't satisfy with those social login type solutions. So they always end up having to build username and password into that process. And if you allow IdRamp to interface to self-sovereign, then you don't have to do that. That can be your other option, right? You can do social if you need to. Click on self-sovereign, bring your own credential and log into the service, and the service provider is out of that business. So that's really transformative for the service provider, and it also will help us move the consumer closer to a day when they can do a fully self-sovereign, or at least bringing their own identity into these service providers.
Excellent. And for anyone listening that would like to stay up to speed with the progress that you're going to be making, especially as we're now heading into 2020, can you point me in the direction of your website and also how to contact your team if they are left with any questions after listening to our conversation today?
Certainly, idramp.com, and you can find all the contact information out there. We have a lot of good technical white papers and documentation out there explaining what we're up to, and we're always happy to talk to people. So give us a shout, reach out.
Excellent. Well, like I said at the very beginning of this podcast, IdRamp is known for specializing in self-sovereign identity, which, yes, is referred to as blockchain identity very often. During this conversation, though, we've all learned how you're uniquely focused on transforming identity and access management for the enterprise, but also what exactly that means and how it will impact their business, their world. And I think that's so important, especially as we're trying to increase adoption in this space and increase that transformational change and actually understand exactly what IdRamp presents in that blockchain identity space. So I cannot thank you enough for coming on today, Mike, and actually explaining that and making it so much clearer, because I think it's invaluable work. It really is. So thanks so much.
It's an exciting space, and thank you very much. We love the work that you're doing, and we're happy to be part of your program.
A special thank you to Mike for not only taking the time to explain identity management infrastructure and the role of blockchain in a language that everyone can understand and come on this podcast today, but also for being an all-round great guy, because embarrassingly for me, I was 10 minutes late to the recording of this episode, and I hate being late for anything. But Mike was incredibly gracious and patient and understanding with this podcast host. So Mike, I salute you, my friend. And I also salute him for bringing on so many valuable insights today. And as a result of that, I, for one, have a much better understanding of self-sovereign identity, aka blockchain identity, and the unique focus that IdRamp has on this transformation of identity and access management, all for the enterprise. But I'm curious, did it clear anything up for you? Did you get more answers, or were you left with even more questions? Or do you have something additional that you'd like to add to today's conversation that you feel we missed? Whatever it is, please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, tweet me @NeilCHughes, or pop by my website, techblogwriter.co.uk. If you want to find out a little bit more about IdRamp or what Mike looked like, just pop it over to podcasts, scroll down, and you'll see a list of all the episodes that we've recorded. But I'm afraid we're out of time again. Where does the time go? So I shall see you all bright and early tomorrow. I will be doing a roll call, so make sure you're present, and I'll see you there. So thanks for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.